Welcome to Leonard Springs Nature Day. We hope you're ready to watch and learn as we explore our local environments. Remember, you must follow along in your student journals and use the materials provided in your Nature Day activity kits to complete today's lesson. Let us start by defining the ecosystem we are studying. Karst is a type of landscape that is formed when soluble rock types such as limestone, marble, and gypsum break down in water and erode over time to form sinkholes on the surface, underground streams, cave openings, and springs. Southern Indiana has several well-developed areas of karst landscape because of all the limestone bedrock. These formations provide important habitat for wildlife and various recreational activities for people. However, they are very sensitive to disturbance and can be easily contaminated. For the remainder of today's lesson, we are going to focus on karst habitats here in Indiana. To learn more, let's visit one of our naturalists.
Welcome to Karst Station. So for this station, you're going to need your journal and a writing utensil, and that's all. My name's Dominic Hepner. I'm one of the City of Bloomington Parks and Recreation naturalists, and I'm going to be leading you through karst and trying to figure out what exactly karst even is. So let's start there. Let's start at the term. Karst topography is a way we classify different types of natural features. So specifically when it comes to karst, we are talking about these features that are formed in the rocks by water. And we're going to get a lot more into that. But first, we need to understand what rocks we're even talking about. So here in Bloomington, we are located in south central Indiana, and our bedrock, so that's if you dig through all the dirt, the rock at the very bottom, our bedrock is actually limestone. All right, you'll see this a lot. We build a lot of buildings about it. There's quarries for it everywhere. We have a lot of limestone in Bloomington, and limestone is actually perfect for karst formations. So in order to understand why limestone is perfect for karst formations, we need to get a little more into what exactly causes them. So typically our karst formations are going to be caused by moving water. All right, so this could be groundwater or surface water. Any sort of moving water is going to carve out those stones and it's going to form our karst formations. Now specifically why limestone is the best is carbon dioxide and water mix to form carbonic acid, and that carbonic acid is especially good at eating its way through limestone. So it's going to slowly erode that limestone, and it's going to form things like caves, sinkholes, and aquifers. What an aquifer is it's a pocket underground that's holding a vast amount of underground water. All right, now these aquifers can be connected to underground streams and lakes, and this water moves around. It doesn't just stay in one place. So here specifically, you'll see a small chart that looks like mine, and it'll show you the Leonard Springs watershed. So what this watershed is this is all of the underground and above ground water and how it flows and how it enters this watershed. So this is how the water moves in the environment from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. So specifically here at Leonard Springs, that water comes up and it's surfaced, and it comes out. Originally it came out at our shelter cave there. Now it comes out at what is currently the spring, but it's the movement of that water that carves out these caves and leads to this sinkhole that's behind me and our shelter cave that we have farther on down the trail. Now that we understand the Leonard Spring watershed is actually much larger and all-encompassing, it's a huge area, let's get into what can pollute it. So what can cause problems in this watershed. So we divide our pollutants into two forms. So this would be non-point source pollutions and point source pollutants. And these, we distinguish these based on how they enter the environment. So a point source pollutant is a pollutant that we can localize to one specific area and cause. And that is how it is entering our environment. So you could think a smokestack or maybe a runoff pipe from a factory. So this is a point source that we can narrow down, identify, and trace. A non-point source pollutant is one that enters the environment in various ways, so it makes it harder to track. It's not as localized or centralized. So you could think of this as runoffs. So any pollutant that enters our watershed via runoff is a non-point source pollutant. And these can come from things like farms, vehicles, fertilizer spraying, any sort of spray, exhaust, runoff, anything like that is a non-point source pollutant. So now that we've identified what a non-point source pollutant is, let's look at how those impact our karst topography. So, as we learned, one of our non-point source pollutants can be from farms, and the runoff from their fertilizer or from the manure from the livestock. This creates an excess of nitrogen in our water. So we have farms, which we'll represent by this small cow here. Another one of our very common non-point source pollutants are runoffs from car exhaust and fuel, oil, leaks like that. Anything coming off the roadways and filtering into our water systems. So with this model, we're looking at a zoomed in version of our karst topography that has all of our karst features and non-karst topography. So just our regular kind of soil subsection here, what we'd see if we went straight in the ground. And we're going to see how those non-point source pollutants affect those areas. So we'll start with the non-karst, so just our standard groundwater. We're going to include a little bit of dye in water, and that's going to show us how it moves through the system. All right, so we've added some dye, some water, and this represents our non-point source pollutants entering our dirt. So just our groundwater here, it's run into our water system and it's encountered non-karst topography. And as we can see, it slowly starts to filter down through the sand. It's moving very slow and it's kind of spreading out. It's really finding the path of least resistance, but it is not taking a direct route straight down. It's encountering obstacles and it's kind of working its way into every crack and crevice and slowly filtering down through our layers. Now we're going to see how a similar pollutant, a similar non-point source pollutant, would affect our karst topography. So we use red dye for our non-karst topography. We will use blue dye for our karst topography. And as we can see, our blue dye here just immediately races into our sinkhole. It enters those underground waterways, and it just finds its way into every our well or underground water source or aquifers, and it moves very fast. It encounters very little resistance, and it does not need to filter through at all. So now that all of our water is filtered through, we can see in comparison, our karst topography, it went through it immediately. Just extremely fast, no standing water left, filtered all the way through, entered our underground groundwater, and then started to merge into the other side. So it actually exited our karst region. Whereas our groundwater here that entered through a non-karst area, so these other non-point source pollutants, they haven't even reached the groundwater. They haven't even reached the bottom level yet. They're still filtering through all those additional layers of soil and sediment that our karst topography does not have. So, as we can see, when pollutants enter our water system, our karst topography is especially vulnerable to even smaller levels of pollutants, simply to how fast and how little resistance those pollutants in that water has traveling through this ecosystem. Now that we know how karst systems are formed and how pollutants impact those ecosystems, let's go visit one and see what organisms call them home. Welcome to the Leonard Springs Shelter Cave. This cave sits just above Shirley Springs, and at one time this is actually where Shirley Springs would have came out of. So this would have been the mouth of Shirley Springs. That would have been at a time when the water level was much higher. And historically here, the water levels changed quite a few times. If you can see here, all these little circular indentations going on here, those are actually fossilized troglobites. So the water levels changed many times in this region, and that's what actually formed this shelter cave here. At one time, it would have gone all the way back, and it would have connected to our larger cave system, but as you can see, ours is caved in here in the back, effectively sealing this off. Now, our caves have different zones. This here would be known as the entrance. If we go a little bit farther back to where we still have light making it through, but we are completely covered, we are in the cave environment, that is known as the twilight zone. And then we have the dark zone. The dark zone will be once we get to a part of the cave where we do not see any light from the outside. Each of these have their own unique ecosystems. So in the dark zone, we'll find animals that are adapted to caves. These are the only animals that are going to live here, and they're going to be adapted fully to that darkness. So these animals might be blind because they don't really need eyes. They see through smell or sound or other cues. They also typically will have a loss of pigment. So in the dark zone of a cave, you will find animals that are white or translucent, and they've just evolved this way because they no longer need the pigment to camouflage themselves like they would outside of the cave. In the twilight zone, you're going to have animals like, you'll see a lot of our insects. You might have insects from outside that come in. These are known as accidentals. And you'll even have some sort of like mosses or some vegetation can grow in that low light area. And then of course at the entrance, you'll have a much wider range of light and a wider range of plants, insects, and all kinds of life that'll come up to the entrance of a cave zone. Some examples of what we'll find in our zones. Here in our entrance zone, you would see, nesting birds, some of our salamanders, and some of those species that are just trying to get away from the elements. This is going to be kind of where they're seeking shelter. In the twilight zone, that's where we're going to find a larger variety of insects, and then we'll also encounter rodents, and our bats are also going to roost in this twilight zone. There's ample food sources for them and plenty of shelter as well. And then in the dark zone, that is where we're going to have organisms that are specifically adapted to those environments. For instance, we would have blind fish, cave crawfish, things of that nature. So things that have adapted to where they will not leave that dark zone. So one of the animals that I mentioned in particular were bats. Here in Indiana, we have several species of bats, but one that I'd like to talk to you about is the brown bat. So the brown bats are actually endangered, and we do find them here. Now, bats have several adaptations that make caves their ideal habitat. One that is going to be their feet. So bats will hang upside down. They do this when they sleep and when they hibernate. And this is actually an adaptation they have. So not only do they sleep upside down, but their muscles are designed for this. So their foot muscles have a resting position that is closed, and that's what allows them to sleep and be unconscious while also being upside down. Bats also have very limited eyesight, and instead they navigate using echolocation. So they bounce sound off the walls or their surroundings, and when it comes back to them, they interpret that, and that's how they kind of navigate. So that's why bats can live in the twilight and almost all the way back to the dark zone of caves, is using that echolocation. One final thing is using that echolocation, it allows bats to be able to hunt at night. So most of our bats are nocturnal. They evolved this not only because they live in caves, but to exclude them from daytime competition. Bats are rather small. During the day, they could be easily predated, but at night, they can navigate using sound, so they do not need to see, and there's an abundance of insects, which is what they primarily feed on. So feeding on insects at night, this makes them insectivores. So that's going to be their only source of food, and all the bats here in Indiana happen to be that. Bats are also our only true flight mammal. This means they can create thrust and lift on their own. It's very important to practice cave safety. There is a fungal disease known as white-nosed bat syndrome, and it will actually kill them. And the most common way that is transmitted is by people wearing clothing or maybe visiting multiple caves in one day. Anything you've taken from one cave to another has the possibility to transmit that fungal disease to bats. So in conclusion, many species reside in caves in those 3 light zones, and these are very fragile and unique ecosystems. So it is up to us to steward the land and to watch our own actions and how we interact with cave ecosystems in order to preserve and protect them for future generations.
At this point of the lesson, you should have completed pages 10 and 11 in your student journal. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.